One night, one death, but two completely different stories of how it happened. Today, we are diving deep into the murder trial of Nima Momeni. This is a case where a jury was faced with a stark choice. Was this a planned, vengeful murder, or was it a desperate fight for survival?
So let's set the scene. It's April 2023. On a quiet, dark street in San Francisco, the celebrated tech founder Bob Lee, the creator of Cash App, is found stabbed. His death sent absolute shockwaves to the tech community, and, it kicked off a legal saga that really captured everyone's attention.
And right at the heart of this trial, you have these two totally opposing narratives. On one hand, you have the suspect, Nima Momeni, saying, "I did it in self-defense." On the other, the prosecution is arguing, no, this was a planned, cold-blooded murder. The big question is, which version of reality did the jury believe? Okay, let's get into it.
First up, let's look at the story the prosecution told. Over 7 weeks, they laid out this really chilling picture for the jury, arguing that this wasn't some random act of violence. No, they said this was the final act in a story of simmering rage and calculated revenge.
During their closing arguments, the prosecution really zeroed in on this one powerful point. Think about it. You have one guy, Bob Lee, on the phone with 911, literally pleading for his life. And then you have the other person, Nima Momeni, who, according to them, just left. He never called for help, never called the police. They argued that contrast, right there, just completely shatters any claim of self-defense.
The prosecution literally built their case step by step. It all started with the why, the motive. They said Momeni was absolutely furious about his sister's involvement with Lee and a drug dealer. Then they pointed to the how, the weapon, a specific brand of kitchen knife they say he took from his sister's place. And finally, the where, the opportunity. He drove Lee to this dark, isolated spot. You put all those pieces together, the prosecution argued, and it spells out a clear, deliberate plan to commit murder.
All right, now let's flip the script and look at the defense's side of the story. They presented a completely different version of that night, arguing that Nima Momeni wasn't a murderer at all. He was a survivor.
And in a really dramatic turn, Momeni actually took the stand to testify. His entire defense, everything really, boiled down to this one simple, powerful claim. He looked at the jury and said he wasn't the one who started it. He was ambushed, and every single thing he did from that moment on was driven by pure, mortal fear.
So the defense's story goes like this. They portrayed Bob Lee as someone deep into a drug binge, making him agitated and, they claimed, violent. Then, a bad joke from Momeni supposedly set Lee off, causing him to suddenly pull his own knife and attack. In their telling, Momeni just fell back on his martial arts training to defend himself, and in that chaotic struggle, he unknowingly stabbed Lee.
So as you can see, it all came down to this one critical piece of evidence, the knife. Whose knife was it? The prosecution had what seemed like a slam dunk, a kitchen knife with Momeni's DNA on the handle and Lee's blood on the blade. But the defense came back with their own theory, saying Lee had his own knife, and they even showed a video from earlier that night that they claimed supported this. The answer to this one question, whose knife, was going to decide everything.
So after 7 long weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury went into deliberations for 7 days. When they finally came back, their decision, well, it wasn't a clear win for either side. It didn't perfectly match the prosecution's story or the defense's.
The verdict was read in a packed courtroom. Guilty. But here's the twist. It wasn't for first-degree murder, which is what the prosecution wanted. The jury found Momeni guilty of second-degree murder, and that decision shows they found a middle ground, a version of the truth that was somewhere between a cold-blooded plot and a desperate act of self-defense.
Okay, so what does second-degree murder actually mean in this context? It means the jury believed the killing was intentional, but, and this is the key part, it wasn't premeditated or planned in advance. That distinction is everything, and it really unlocks how the jury was thinking.
Basically, this verdict was a compromise. The jury clearly didn't buy the self-defense argument, but they also weren't convinced by the prosecution's theory that this was some big, premeditated revenge plot. So they landed on a third possibility, that in the heat of the moment, Momeni made a willful choice to kill Lee, but it was an impulsive, unplanned act of violence.
Now you might think the story ends there, right? Momeni is facing a long prison sentence, case closed. But not so fast. The legal battle has just moved from the criminal courtroom into the civil one, and a new lawsuit is adding a whole other layer of complexity to this case. So, Bob Lee's family has now filed a wrongful death lawsuit. And they aren't just suing Nima Momeni. They're also suing his sister and his mother. And the accusation is a bombshell, that they helped him cover up the murder. They're accused of hiding evidence, specifically his white BMW, and even trying to sell it. This lawsuit isn't just about financial compensation. It's about trying to hold an entire family accountable for an alleged conspiracy.
So where does all this leave us? We have a criminal verdict, yes. A jury made a decision. But now, with a whole new lawsuit that accuses his family of a cover-up, it feels like we're maybe even further from knowing the full truth of what happened that night. The courtroom has spoken, but the complete story? Well, that might still be unfolding.